Good afternoon and welcome back. This is TaxCalc TV and today we are revisiting that eternally thorny subject of anti-money laundering. I'm joined once again by the fantastic Dean Shepherd, who is not only responsible for ensuring the compliance of all of TaxCalc's products, including AML Centre, but also the Director of Customer Engagement, and he acted as the MLRO when he had his own FATM. And on the top of that, I'm delighted to welcome back to the studio the doyenne of AML, Lucy Brown. Lucy is one half of the team at Calathea, who are a consultancy dedicated to helping firms of all sizes understand where they're going right and where they're going wrong with their AML compliance. So thank you very much for coming in again, Lucy. We had such a positive reaction last time and so many questions that we just didn't have time to get to, so we just had to get you back in. So on the agenda today, we're going to be looking at the latest AML regulations and the potential changes that are coming up, but that is just for starters. I'm firmly of the belief that just knowing the regulations is only part of the puzzle when it comes to practice compliance. What we really want to get to is what the practical implications of those regulations really are. What do you have to actually do when you identify a particularly risky client? What's the reasoning that you have to complete a firm-wide compliance assessment? Personally, I think the more you understand why you're being asked to jump through these hoops, the more that they'll make sense. And that means they'll be less frustrating and you'll probably do a better job of avoiding the criminal activity that this is all designed to do. So to that end, we're going to be looking at some scenarios that you'll possibly find familiar and explain the context around them. But as always, this is designed to be interactive. Please ask any questions, post any comments that you've got in the chat, the bottom right hand of the screen for anyone new. We'll try and get to as many of them as possible. You do have the option of using the Q&A function. Only we will see those though, and you do run a risk of being missed. So the chat is probably where you want to focus. So, before we get started as well, can someone please ask in the chat whether there will be a recording sent out? We will answer that one because that's a big question that we're always asked. But we're going to set off with a poll. Dean, you've got a poll.
I do have a poll. And we have been asked that question in the chat.
Oh, we have? Okay, I can answer that question. Yes, we will be sending out a recording. There you go, I had to wait for that to be asked. Dean, what was the poll question to kick off?
Okay, I've just made that live. If you don't see it on your screens, then do look to the bottom right of your screen. You should have an option for polls and see that poll. And it's how confident are you that your firm is up to date on the recent AML regulations? The options being not confident at all, that's why I'm here. Reasonably confident, just looking for a refresher. Or super confident, so much so that I could probably deliver this webinar myself.
Got some cocky super confidence there.
We have some super confident people on the call. Yeah, we'll be asking those people some questions as we go through. But broadly speaking, the majority are reasonably confident but want a refresher. But we do have some people that are less confident.
Less confident. Well, you are in the right place. So let's get started then. So Lucy, we're going to do the regulation bit first. It's ever changing. What's happened and what's coming up in terms of AML?
Okay, so recently HM Treasury put out a consultation paper. I think they published that on the 11th of March this year. So that is open for all accountants, anyone in the regulated sector, supervisors, everyone to have a read and comment on. So that paper is to try and improve the effectiveness of the MLRs. HM Treasury recognise that changes could be made to increase the effectiveness and ensure proportionality of the MLRs for both regulated firms and the customers. So it has 4 key themes, which are making customer due diligence more proportionate and effective, strengthening system coordination, providing clarity on scope of the MLRs, and reforming registration requirements for the Trust Registration Service. So HM Treasury are really keen to hear from all accountants, bookkeepers, anyone else in the regulated sector, and they So they have a list of questions off the back of that consultation paper, but they also have a questionnaire out at the moment regarding the cost of implementing AML within practices, which they really like firms to fill out. If we can send out the links to those after the webinar.
I'll drop those in the chat.
Oh, yeah, please do that. Now, firms have until the 9th of June to submit their comments and answers. So that would really help. And obviously, they want the widest range of people filling those in so that they get a really good idea of what it means to everyone. So that's the consultation. And then there's been a few changes to legislation and just general practice since I was in, I think, in October or November time, at the back end of last year anyway. So there's been a change to the treatment of politically exposed persons. So that's an individual who's entrusted with prominent public functions other than as a middle ranking or junior official. So you're thinking heads of state, members of parliament, high ranking military officials, those kind of people. Now, due to their position, they're in a position of influence and power. They are considered to be higher risk because they are prone or vulnerable to corruption and bribery. And so up to date, well, and carrying on, you apply enhanced due diligence to politically exposed persons. But what they are now saying is that domestic PEPs, so those that have been entrusted within the UK, their starting point for their risk assessment is at a lower level of risk than for a non-domestic PEP. So that needs to be written into the firm's policy and procedures, how they deal with domestic as opposed to non-domestic PEPs.
And that's probably very topical, isn't it, Andy, given that we have a politically exposed person in our midst today?
The town councillor for Monmouth does not count as politically exposed. Well, maybe a bit politically exposed.
Okay.
I think it is fair to say, though, anyone with a position of power, you should be attuned to that within your risk assessment of your client. So although they might not be a politically exposed person, there might be an element of increased risk there. But firms need to remember to apply a risk-based approach across all their client risk assessments.
How specific are they when they describe enhanced due diligence? How specific is enhanced? How do you know you've reached that level?
It's not, there's no prescription. There are suggestions as to what you should do for enhanced due diligence, such as looking at a client's source of wealth or source of funds if it's required. You should apply greater scrutiny, but it doesn't give you that kind of base level to then be enhancing.
Right.
So it is particular to your risk-based approach within your firm and within your policies and procedures. So you need to say in your policy and procedures what you do as a standard client due diligence, and then what you will add to that to make it enhanced.
So do you come across that? Does that cause a lot of confusion in the clients that you engage with? Sort of how that they demonstrate?
No, I don't. No, not really. You just need to be aware of when it needs to be applied. I think a lot of firms already do quite what you could consider enhanced due diligence. Bookkeepers and accountants are trained to really be particular about the details they're working with, and therefore they do already apply a great level of scrutiny to the transactions. The regulations apply to all regulated industries. So you're talking banks, you're talking casinos, you're talking estate agents. Now, bookkeepers and accountants come under it as accountancy service providers, but what they're already doing is really detailed. And so I think they are often doing enhanced level due diligence compared to other sectors potentially. But it's all about documenting what your base level is and therefore what you do for enhanced due diligence.
Okay, so it's a grey area there.
It's all grey.
It's always a grey area.
But it's documenting and justifying.
Okay, and also another question. You mentioned about the cost. They're interested in keeping a track of the cost. Is that something that they're increasingly concerned about, or are they just tracking that? Do you think there might be something further down the line on that?
I'm not entirely certain. I think there's been a lot of noise from regulated firms that AML is costly, it's time consuming, it's not achieving what it's set out to achieve, and we know from the pressure on OPBAS and the supervisory bodies that what we are doing in the UK is not effective enough. And therefore anything that makes it easier for the regulated firm to apply anti-money laundering and comply with it is going to help. And if firms are saying, this is costing us too much, it's not effective, and we can't do it, then they've got to listen to that, haven't they?
Right, and the costs, I mean, I'm presuming there's software costs, there's time costs?
Yeah, so the survey kind of asks what size of firm you are, how many people you have, if you have a team dedicated to AML or compliance, the full-time equivalent that team would be equal to, or if you don't have a team, what you're doing, the time it's taking you, therefore the estimated cost, and a kind of in relation to your turnover. So yes, time, but that has a monetary calculation to it.
Okay.
So yeah, PEPs we've talked about. Are you happy for me to go
Town
on?
councillors.
Town councillors.
Yeah, I mean, when someone does lobby me about where they should position the dog bins in the town, it does expose me to a lot of risk there of blackmail and all sorts, as you could imagine. It's a jungle out there. Anyway, yes. So
I don't know where to go from that.
So we're looking at the legislative changes that are coming up. Domestic.
Yeah. So PEPs I've talked about.
We've done the PEPs.
That came in January, so just be aware of that. There's another two more cosmetic changes. High-risk third countries from 22nd of January this year. The list of high-risk third countries stopped being an appendix to the money laundering regulations, and they are now defined as a country named on FATF's lists. So FATF is the Financial Action Task Force. They have two lists, high-risk jurisdictions subject to a call for action list and jurisdictions under increased monitoring list. On these lists are countries that are not doing very well with their AML compliance and governance. So they update those lists 3 times a year in February, June and October. So if you want to know what countries are high-risk third countries, you need to go to their website and look at those lists.
Who's number one at the moment? Put you on the spot.
Oh, damn you.
Dominican Republic.
No. Oh, yeah. No, I'm not going to answer. You don't. Yes, I think so. That's really mean of you.
Does anyone else know?
I feel like I'm on a television quiz show. You know when you're at home and you can answer instantly.
Yeah,
my mind's just gone,
throw that at you.
Yeah, that was really mean.
We're horrible to Lucy when she comes in.
We have had a question come in, Andy, if you want to pull that one out. So Colin has asked whether, when you're looking at transactions of your clients, is there any de minimis limit for transactions amounts, say?
No, money laundering has no de minimis value. So anything that are proceeds of crime, and you are handling that, or your client is handling those, it is money laundering. They don't need to have committed the initial crime, but anything that comes from criminal activity. And yeah, it could be, there's no threshold.
Okay, so the €10,000 amount suggested, Colin, is probably
no.
a bit of wishful thinking there.
Is talking about the high value transactions.
Okay.
So that's written into legislation that you would have to do money laundering checks on someone that does an occasional transaction of high value. And they are considering changing that because it's all in euros. Basically, FATF is based in France. although it's all these different countries, there's over 200 country jurisdictions and other bodies that feed into it. They make the regulations or the recommendations that then the regulations are written from. So lots of stuff's in French. So when they go and do the mutual evaluations of all the different countries, it doesn't matter what country you are, you have to have it in English or French, which makes it really hard for some countries when they don't speak English or French to get the nuance across of how they're doing their regulation. So interesting fact.
Interesting fact.
But that's why it's in euros, and they are talking about changing it to be sterling equivalent, so that is easier for us. We don't have to look at exchange rates and things.
Great.
So Michaela's asking, this is around the international side. So is it possible to cover what AML procedures and information should be gathered for non-UK citizens? So they haven't got a driving licence, passport, maybe living with a spouse's family, don't have any addresses. How do you handle someone like that?
So they should have some kind of documentation that originates from their country of origin, and although you wouldn't necessarily know what that is meant to look like, so identifying a fraudulent document is quite hard. There is a website, Prado, Prado, which lists what different documents should look like, and it will give you photos. So that's a really good place to start. Then any other evidence that you can get of who they are. So there was no address documentations, did you say?
Say, for example, they haven't got, they're living with a partner, your relative, so they don't have any proof of address. I guess at some point you're going to have to draw the line and not act.
No, you need to be able to justify that they are who they say they are. And I think there's a lot more kind of leniency on people not having that proof of address these days, because it is really hard, because everything's online, can be changed. Potentially HMRC, you should have government documentation. I would say anything that you do have, phone bills, even if it is online, if you can get enough documentation that you can satisfy yourself that you have, and then in your client risk assessment, make a note of what you have done to identify them. Again, look at them up online, just check that everything they're saying to you kind of tallies. There's all sorts of things you can do, but if you can, get those documentation pieces.
And then follow up to that, what needs to be done if one of the PSC or the director is based overseas in an overseas country?
Exactly the same. You get your proof of ID, your proof of address, have a Zoom call with them, talk to them. Again, I know someone was asking recently, they had a proof of address in Chinese, and they don't read Chinese, Mandarin, whatever it was. So again, put it through a translation service online, have a look, maybe even Google. I'm trying not to use Google. Look them up on an online map system.
You can use Google.
I use Google a lot. So look them up on Google Maps. And again, just make sure everything makes sense to you and do what you can. And again, document what you've done and justify why you have done it.
Okay. We're getting a lot of questions around that ID checking. Will an electronic check suffice if there's no photo ID? Or do you need the photo ID too?
You need the photo ID. You do an electronic check, and so the EU directive does now, I think it was 5th EU directive, does allow for you not to meet your client and do online verification, but you need that documentation to begin with to be able to do it. And even so, how do you then know that your client is who they say they are?
Yeah.
So they could have passed you a passport of someone else and say they have that other person's name, and you wouldn't know unless you met them and saw that actually they didn't look like that person.
So electronic or face-to-face checking?
Yeah, but if you go electronic, try and do one with a biometric test built in.
Yeah. Okay. Fab. And there was some news on the portal.
Yeah, so NCA, again, this really is a cosmetic change. NCA portal for suspicious activity reports, they closed their old portal. So from the 4th of March, they've got a new portal, but it does mean people need to register to use the new one. The registration from the old one won't carry across. And if you had draft suspicious activity reports in the old portal, they won't have moved across, so you'll need to start again.
Joy.
Yeah.
Joy. There'll be some new...
But I'm sure it's been done for a very good reason, and it's much easier to use.
Yes, so new portal for everyone out there. Okay, so we've got some questions here, but if we could go to the poll, because the poll specifically refers to suspicious activity reports.
Yes, it does. So I'm actually really interested to know, particularly as I was the money laundering reporting officer, I think for maybe 12 years in my practice, and I can probably count on one hand the amount of suspicious activity reports that were submitted from my firm. So please cast your votes. How many suspicious activity reports do you estimate your firm has submitted over the past 12 months? And that ranges from none right the way through to more than 10. So I'll be interested to see how many of you are firing lots of SARs. I can see from the early results that a large proportion, almost 3/4 of people won't have submitted any SARs over the past 12 months. And then we have a more even split in those other options. And perhaps only one person submitting more than 10 in the past 12 months.
Did you know the NCA have just put out their report on SARs submitted in the last year? And I haven't read it in full, so I probably shouldn't have mentioned it right now. I'm going to put my foot in it. But the level done by accountants and bookkeepers is something like less than 1% submitted in total, massively overshadowed by the banks who put in an awful lot. But they tend to have kind of transaction monitoring software in their systems, which will flag up constantly. So, but it's a very small amount, and the numbers have gone down overall.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I can only recall submitting one, I have to say.
Yeah, I submitted one. Yeah, plenty of internal reports, but...
So I think the frustration a lot of people have is that they submit them and then don't hear anything else. They just feel like it's just firing
gone into a black hole
to the darkness.
Yeah.
And I think we discussed this before, but there's not really a way they can't keep you up to date with what happens with them.
Not with the hundreds of thousands that are submitted each year, and it might be years before actually something results from them.
Yeah.
So no, they don't keep you up to date, but they're all when they come in, you put a code in the SAR which says what kind of offence has taken place, and it will then get sent off to the right department. So they are all looked at, but you don't hear back, which it is really frustrating for those that are submitting them. You feel like
you're wasting your time.
But you're really not.
We have had a question from Angela asking, should we register for the new portal even if we don't need to do an SAR?
Yeah, the recommendation is yes, you register so that you're ready to submit when you have a suspicion. It takes 2 minutes, so why not? If you had an inspection from your supervisor, the likelihood is they would then ask if you are registered. You wouldn't be penalised for not being, but they would suggest that you did. So yeah.
Cool. So we're going to get on to some of the more intricate, the background, the nuanced stuff here. So Lucy we've got some case studies. Would you call them case studies? They're real life examples.
I've called them case studies, yes.
They're case studies.
Yeah.
So we're going to look at some real life examples of specific of people involved in money laundering, whether wittingly or unwittingly, just to give you a bit of a picture of how people can get embroiled in this. It's not, people often say, I've known my client base for 10 years, none of them are going to be money laundering, and I can't see why I have to go through all this process. And that can be problematic, as we're going to hear. So tell us about number one. What's the on your list?
Okay, so as you said, these are real cases that my colleague Mike worked on in the past. Again, I'm not going to identify anyone from these. So Guy set up small series of businesses. He would form them through legitimate businesses, but he wanted to launder money And he did this through these legitimate businesses to give an air of kind of legitimacy and respectability to what he was doing. So he would set up legitimate businesses,
They're typically
run them.
cash-based businesses.
Typically
usually.
cash-based, yep. And on the side, he had criminal activity. He was getting money through drug dealing and human trafficking. He would look for what he called a good bookkeeper. Now, it was a respectable bookkeeper, reputable. He didn't want a dodgy bookkeeper because he realised that in the end he would be ripped off by them. So he would look for a good, in the true sense of the word, a good bookkeeper, but one who didn't ask too many questions, would accept anything they were told, so wouldn't ask too many questions, and just do what they were asked to do. So he would approach a friend or another businessman or woman and ask for recommendations for bookkeepers. And over time, he'd find a bookkeeper that was recommended to him that was good, wouldn't ask too many questions, and he would take them on. And over time, he would befriend them and he would gain their trust. So get their confidence. And he really liked that referral because it seemed to take the bookkeeper off their guard.
Right.
So a bookkeeper would think, this person's being referred to me, they must be good. And it's something we've all done. We automatically think that someone that's being referred to us is slightly lower risk, but not necessarily so.
Because we talked about that previously, didn't we? About noting whether someone was referred to you, why we do that, and what the implications might be. So that's possibly where that's coming from.
Yeah, and we found in inspections that people would say that, they were recommended to them, so I've not taken client due diligence. But
and that's their defence.
That's their defence, yeah. Okay, so most of the time, you'd find that client was probably absolutely fine, but this is a tactic used by criminals to gain trust, to take you off your guard. So you've got to be aware. So he'd befriend the bookkeeper, he'd gain the trust over a number of years, and that's where it's really important. He didn't start laundering the cash instantly. He waited years before then, through these legitimate businesses, this criminal cash would start filtering. So by that point, the bookkeeper's really not looking.
So the guards aren't up.
The guards, yeah, absolutely. So this particular person became an upstanding member of the community, served on his parish council.
We know this. We know the
sort.
I said I wouldn't identify who they were. So he was providing funds to local projects in the area, and so to all intents and purposes, he was a great businessman and he was a great person, and gained the trust of everyone around him as well. But it was only when things turned sour for the individual that people started to think that actually things they'd seen and heard didn't quite add up. He never seemed to go to work, and he had the biggest house in the village. So a bit odd. As you said, he invested in businesses like hairdressers, car washes, nail bars, and those, so high cash businesses. And in the end, he received a substantial term of imprisonment. Judge ordered him to hand over £100 million or face another double-figure term in behind bars, and he opted for the longer prison service, and I think that was another 12 years on top of what he'd already had. So they will protect their criminal assets by having longer in jail.
They'll even go to prison to protect that.
Yeah.
So does that resonate with anyone in the chat? I mean, have you got experiences of people that you have been referred to you? It's interesting to know how that might pan out. So, just to be clear, then, so what happened to the bookkeeper? Was there any?
I told you this before we started. I don't know. In this case, I don't know what happened to the bookkeeper, but if they'd been, they should have been they prosecuted for money laundering. They knew they they should have known what was going on. They should have done the due diligence that they were not compliant in the regulations. Whether they went to jail or not, or had a fine, I'm not entirely certain. But they certainly weren't doing their job.
Do you know what kind of level of expectation there might be on an accountant or bookkeeper to spot these kind of transactions of having come from a illegitimate source? Or?
The expectation is that you do what you can, and you are aware, and you have a culture of compliance within your firm. So if it is trickling in and you have paperwork to support everything, you're not going to be able to notice it. But if you haven't done your due diligence on your person, and then suddenly £10,000 of cash comes into the business and you don't question it, then you're going to be in trouble. As we said before, it is a grey area. But if you can prove that you have this culture of compliance within your firm, you do question abnormal transactions, you have done your checks on your person, and you have ongoing monitoring of your clients, the likelihood is then they will consider you to be doing what you should be doing, and you've been hoodwinked by your client. I think an impressive criminal will get past your checks because they will understand what you have to do. So you can only do as much as you're able to. But you've got to protect yourself by fulfilling or complying with the legislation, having your notes, having all your risk assessments in place, having a firm-wide risk assessment, all those documents you need, that they are in place and you are following them. It's not just a token effort.
I think it's very interesting as well that your reputation gets out there, that you're not actually on the ball when it comes to AML, and then the criminal fraternity may well
absolutely, and
hear your name.
That's what we'll discuss in the next case study. Yeah.
Okay. Well, before we do that, we do have a couple of questions. So Terry asks, where is the AML responsibility if you as an accountant are being subcontracted by a solicitor to work for their client, and you'll never meet that client? Do you ask them to confirm that they have done their due diligence, or do you have to do your own AML checks? Good question.
So the responsibility lies with the solicitor, because the end client is... You did say solicitor, didn't you?
Yeah. You're being subcontracted by a solicitor to work for their client. So the client is of the solicitor. So I don't know whether you would even have an engagement with that client directly.
If you're subcontracting, you have an engagement with the solicitor. Let's say you don't have engagement with the end client. Your responsibility would be to report any suspicious activity to the solicitor, to the MLRO in the solicitor's firm, so that they could decide whether an external suspicious activity report needs to be done. But you should do your AML checks on the solicitor, because that is your client. You could do it on the end client if you really felt you ought to, but that's not.
It's not the obligation.
It's not the obligation. I think it's. Yeah, the solicitor's meant to do it on their clients, so you're doing it on the solicitor. You need to report when you are suspicious, and I think that's where the obligation should end. Yeah.
Well, I think question of the week for Terry there. That was an excellent question.
Is that Mr. Ram?
No.
Different Terry.
Okay, so we've got. What do you mean by ongoing monitoring? All very well to identify the client initially, but doing once a year accountant's prep job isn't likely to expose unusual dealings. So if you're only how much, I guess, does the ongoing monitoring depend?
If you're doing it year on year, then you can see what 1 year looks like compared to the next year. No, it is harder if you're only seeing them once a year. Now, I was talking to a client the other day, and what they do is when they do a piece of work for a client, they fill out a kind of report card of everything they've asked the client. So if they have suggested to the client that they ought to be VAT registered because they're getting near to threshold, that goes on that report. The other questions they've asked, and then when they come to do the work the next year, they will refer back to that report card. Have those actions been taken? Do I have the same questions being asked this year? And that way they can gauge whether that client is engaging with them and what they should be doing. So that's an idea that you could do. But ongoing monitoring, it doesn't matter how often you see them, because if you were doing it more than once, then you have something to refer back to.
Right. So it's simply just that.
Yeah. I mean, yes, I understand that if you're doing monthly bookkeeping, it's kind of easier because you're seeing it as you go and you can keep the eye on transactions. But I think the annual is the same. It's just a longer gap between the work that you're seeing.
I want to go to Craig, because Craig has mentioned a few times in here that I think Craig deals with some, what he describes as micro clients.
Right.
And these are tiny. I mean, they're literally. He says, we don't even work from bank statements.
Okay.
So how does AML work in that case? Exactly the same principle?
Exactly the same. So you need to ID and verify your client. You need to keep an eye on what they are doing. And if you are suspicious of that, you need to report it. So that ongoing monitoring as well can be comparing your client to other businesses doing the same kind of thing. So other businesses in the same sector, in the same area. So looking at the transaction levels compared to other people. Now, with that person, you still need to do all those normal checks and any ongoing monitoring that you can do. And you still need to have your policy and procedure and your firm-wide risk assessment, your training documentation, everything else in place.
So, because like we said, there's no lower limit.
No de minimis level. No.
So let's look at this, the next one of your case studies, and we're getting deeper into the criminal fraternity.
Okay, so a money launderer was arrested and was very happy to talk to the police about their bookkeeper, anything to kind of lower their punishment, really, give them all the information they could. So the bookkeeper that they'd taken on was one that was known for having a lax AML practice within their firm. So this bookkeeper had a reputation for not meeting the clients and relying on that documentation that had been emailed through. So as we were talking before, Dean, so they were conducting business without knowing if the person that had instructed them was actually the person that the ID belonged to. And it left the practice wide open to money launderers. So the bookkeeper got this reputation as a good bookkeeper, but not in the same way as in case study 1, a good bookkeeper according to the criminal fraternity. So it's probably not that they were malicious or complicit in anything, but naive or had a lack of understanding of the legislation. So then they weren't doing what they should be doing. They weren't checking their clients. Now, when the money launderer got arrested and the police and NCA went and talked to this bookkeeper, they looked at the bookkeeper's books and client list and found that 80% of the firm's clients were money launderers. So, and that red flags within the business were being ignored. So this really is a bookkeeper that is just not on the ball at all. A vast amount of the clients, they'd not been met, but they had been recommended by other clients. And so no due diligence had been done. So if you take on a criminal money launderer, it is likely that they will then recommend you to their mates. And you get, like we said, a reputation, and you'll get more criminals on your books because you're not asking those questions, and they're looking for someone that will give them the air of legitimacy without the potential risk of being exposed.
I guess it's difficult as well. If you're a small startup firm and you're looking for all the clients that you've got, and one turns up with lots of transactions and lots of work to be done, I guess it can be very
when you are starting up, you want to take on anyone you can because you want to get some money in, and that having the confidence to say to someone, no, you do not fit my business, is really tough, tough. But yeah, you don't want to get that reputation for being the bookkeeper that doesn't ask questions.
In the chat, if you've been in that situation where you really wanted to take on a client and have you been suspicious but not done it? We're interested to know what your experience was.
I mean, in my practice actually, I had a few clients that I would sack because they were just sailing too close to the wind on a whole variety of things and wouldn't take my advice to do things differently. But that was always a difficult conversation to have with them. And I'd have to say for most of them, I didn't kind of, actually wasn't that honest. I didn't spell it out and say, you know, I'm getting rid of you because I think you're a bit dodgy and I don't want to work with dodgy clients. I'd come up with some other spurious reason as to why I would, didn't want to act for them and get them off the buck. So I didn't have to deal with them, because clients always recommend clients similar to themselves, and even if they're not involved in any criminal activity, if you've got a bad client, they tend to recommend bad clients. So
yeah, you sometimes know when, oh, so and so recommended you. Oh, then no, I'm not taking you. You just don't want that person's friend on your books.
I know it came up a little bit earlier on in questions about if you're making a suspicious activity report for a client and the whole not tipping off offence, but you're choosing not to act for that client. Do you have any advice in terms of managing that situation without tipping off?
How to disengage without tipping off? It is a really tough one. Lots of people will do a sudden fee increase and whack it right up, but then the risk is that they will pay that, and criminals are known to pay over the odds for services. So that's a risky one, because then you have to find another way. Just saying that I think you've got to be firm with them. I'm changing the structure of my firm, and I'm no longer able to provide you the service you need. Something along those lines. Again, anything like that, your professional body supervisor or me and Mike can help advise potential ways of doing it. Obviously, we can't discuss a particular suspicion. We can do a theoretical discussion, but we mustn't know anything, otherwise you will be tipping off if you talk to us about it. But you can talk to your professional body supervisor about the suspicion and how to disengage the client. You can talk to us about how to disengage a client. But yeah, there's a few ways you can try and do it. And I think you've got to be firm and say, this is what's happening.
Craig's got an excuse. He said his excuse for dropping clients is that he had to have an eye removed, and I'm reducing my workload to reduce eye strain. Have you?
Wow.
I mean, that could be. It would work, right?
Yeah, but that's the thing. If you are firm with them, I am dropping you because. Can they come back to you and say, but no?
No, you can't. I've got a few questions that have come through. These two case studies have sparked a lot of interest in just really a clarification on electronic ID versus print and hard copy. What are the rules? What are the regs? Explain to our viewers what they need to do.
Okay, so you need to identify and verify your clients. And the best way, and I will always advise, that you meet your client face to face with those documentations, and if you can, literally in a room together, because you then really get a feel for the person as well, and it's great customer service if you can do it. Now, we recognise that actually with everything going online, everything's far more remote, so that's not always possible. So again, where you can't get in a room together, having a Zoom call is really good. It will make you feel stupid, but if you can ask them to put up their documentation next to their face and get a screen print of that, then that's great. Potentially turn the documentation around so that you can see it from different sides, and then get them to email it through as well, or upload it to an AML system. That's great. If you can't do that, then yes, online verification. Try and get a system with biometric check in there. So you need to be sure that any online system you use is, there's a list of things in the CCAB guidance, that it's free from fraud, that it looks at multiple different areas that it's pulling information through from, and those kind of things. So there is a list in the CCAB guidance, which I recommend anybody looks at, and looks at their guidance on online verification as well. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, we did have a question actually asking about identity checking and whether you should run another identity check if the client moves address.
So if the client moves address, so you need to keep your client due diligence documentation up to date. So if you go by the letter of the law, that means if photo ID goes out of date, you should request a new one. And if the client moves house, then you should request new documentation. If you want to do an online verification check at that point, then absolutely fine. There is nothing in the legislation that says you have to do online verification at all. But you do need to have the documentation up to date.
Okay. Deborah asks, a potential new client has many shareholders and directors. Do you need to carry out due diligence on all of them?
So if you've got many shareholders, it's likely that they are not all persons with significant control. So you need to do due diligence on all directors and shareholders with significant control, so anyone with over 25% of the shareholding. And if any of those are corporate bodies, you need to drill back to get the ultimate beneficial owners. With the directors, yes, you should do all of them. Again, if you look at the CCAB guidance, which has been written by, approved and adopted by all the supervisory bodies, it says in certain circumstances you don't need to do all the directors. So that disagrees slightly with the legislation, which says you should do. So if you have a case that you've got an awful lot of directors, it's going to be very time consuming, it doesn't seem proportionate or risk-based, then talk to your supervisory body, because it's them that will come and inspect you and say you've not done it correctly. So if you talk to them and they say, no, you don't need to do them all, make a note of that, get it in writing from them, and then you're covered.
Yeah, there's another question here, probably similar to my practice actually, from Heather. She says, we only meet about 5% of our clients face to face. She uses the very excellent TaxCalc electronic ID check service and also gets a certified copy of either driving licence or passport. Is that okay?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, if she's used online verification, she has documentation and it's been certified as being right, then it's okay. We'd always recommend that you meet face-to-face. So recommendation is face-to-face, but what they are doing is legitimate. I
think that's probably very similar to what I did in my practice, but back when I had that practice, it wasn't so prolific to have Zoom and Teams and all that kind of thing. So I think nowadays, even if I didn't meet them face-to-face, I'd probably, as part of the onboarding process, get them to jump on a call just as a bit of that added...
It's that, are you satisfied they are who they say they are? Does that documentation belong to them? Or belong to the person that's instructing you?
Okay, so move on to the last of Lucy's case studies. Now, last time when Lucy Mike came in, we heard a fantastic story about the farmer, and there were loads of questions about the farmer who had got himself into some trouble unwittingly. You have to go back and watch the previous episode if you want to know what happened to the farmer. But like all good crime dramas, we're going to return to some stories related to a similar character in this one.
Similar story to the farmer. So, criminal enterprise were looking for premises to manufacture their controlled drugs. They approached a local business owner who had commercial offices to let, or commercial premises to let. The criminal enterprise paid over the odds for the premises, which is something that's quite common with criminals. They will pay over the odds. And that should be seen as a red flag instantly. Why would someone pay more? And I think there's an element there of trying to gain someone's trust, trying to get their buy-in from it. You've taken our money. Maybe that's why they do it. So the business owner had been going through lean times and therefore turned a blind eye to the activities in the premises, and over time actually ended up becoming complicit. They ended up joining in the activity and getting involved. Now, larger than normal transactions were going through his bank account and through his accounts, but the bookkeeper, who had identified that these transactions were unusual, did nothing to ask the business owner about them, didn't raise a suspicious activity report. He'd also noticed an improvement in the lifestyle of the businessman, new flashy cars, better dressed. Facebook profile showed that he was awash with cash. So loads and loads and loads of red flags, but didn't do anything about it.
So is that sufficient to raise a suspicious activity report? Just you've seen nothing, you've not heard from them all yet, but they're on your books and you see them driving a Lamborghini round town. Is that sufficient to?
No, well, a suspicion needs to be more than fanciful. So there was a famous case, De Silva versus somebody, and the judge said, to have a suspicion, it needs to be more than fanciful. There needs to be actual facts there that are more than fanciful. So if they're driving a Lamborghini around, maybe they've had a big inheritance. Maybe they've sold a property. So no, you can ask some questions. When maybe you question why, and if they're not able to give you a satisfactory answer, then you've got a suspicion. But either case, maybe raise an internal report that you've noticed this, you've asked a question, and later it might add up to more that then forms a suspicion. So you might not have one then. They might say, oh, my father died, I got inheritance, I'm having a midlife crisis, I bought a Lamborghini. And then the next time you see them, they've also built a swimming pool in their garden. And
okay, so the swimming pool and the Lamborghini equals suspicious activity report?
No, because Mum's now died.
Oh, right.
So then you can have several things. A suspicion often isn't a one event driven. It's a series of smaller things that add up to.
But I guess what I'm saying is, does the suspicious activity report need to arise from your work with them, or does it go beyond that into their behaviour?
No, it is your work with. It is information you come across in the line of your work, actually. So no, that's another grey area.
This is a grey area.
Oh, so you've noticed they've got a Lamborghini, but you are their accountant.
You happen to live in the same village. Yeah. I mean, to be honest, if they're driving a Lamborghini, I think they deserve a suspicious activity report anyway. Just for the. Sorry to anyone who. Kirsty St John, thanks Kirsty, has found from R versus De Silva.
That's it. Yes, thank you.
You have a reportable suspicion if you think there is a possibility which is more than fanciful that a relevant fact exists. In De Silva, it was noted that a vague feeling of unease would not suffice.
Yeah. Thanks, Kirsty. Got my back as usual.
Excellent.
We've had some good questions come in that I think are worth looking at. I've got one here from Dominic. What are the KYC requirements for a single one-off billable meeting? Can you charge a client for initial consultation meeting without having completed a full client risk assessment beforehand?
It would depend what you're doing in that meeting. If you are not providing accountancy services, so you're not going to see any financial data, you could argue that you wouldn't need to. If there is a chance that you'd be able to identify money laundering, then yes, you should. Now, I've had a client where I've gone backwards and forwards with their supervisory body on just that matter, because some of the service they're providing is consultancy generic tax advice, which has nothing to do with their accounts. And it took a long time to get the supervisory body to agree that they didn't need to do AML checks on them. So I would always suggest that you confirm that with your supervisory body, because again, it's them that will judge you on it. So it's their interpretation of the legislation.
Okay, great. Another interesting question here from Christine. If you fire a client because you are not comfortable with their affairs, do you need to share those concerns with a new accountant in response to their professional clearance letter?
You can't tell them that you've submitted a SAR, because that would be tipping off. So no. What you could do is you can say I disengaged the client because I didn't like the way they did business, it didn't suit me. You've got to be really careful. Again, it's like when you disengage your client, you can't tell them why. You can't tell the other bookkeeper. And it's really frustrating because you want the other bookkeeper to know that actually this person's dodgy. But again, sorry, Andy, you've reported a suspicion. You haven't necessarily reported actual money laundering. So unless you have, and you absolutely know, but they've not been convicted of money laundering, and therefore it's reputational damage as well if it isn't actually.
I tended to put good luck and a little smiley face for any of those clients, the accountant, so they can infer what they like from that.
You've got to do something that makes you feel comfortable with handing over, but doesn't tip off.
So very much related to that, Matthew asks, what protection is given, and I think I know the answer to this, by HMRC to informants? This is like line of duty, this. If it would be obvious to a client that you have submitted a SAR because no one else would know the issue. So
they won't give your name. That never gets published. However, like you say, it could be absolutely obvious that it was you because no one else could have known that information. And to be honest, I don't know. They'd have to talk to.
I wonder how many HMRC safe houses they have set up around London to house informants.
I hope they wouldn't house them in London with all the oligarchs
there.
It
could be very, very iffy. Fabulous. Okay, so we have pretty much run out of time.
Well, can we just?
You want to finish off
that story? Yeah. So the client was then arrested 3 years later, and the bookkeeper was visited by law enforcement, and it was identified the bookkeeper hadn't questioned the suspicious activity, hadn't put in a SAR, and readily admitted to having suspicions but not doing anything about it. Now, what was found out was that the drug factory also had illegal immigrants working in it who were working against their will.
So trafficking as well. And in court, the judge commented that obviously if the bookkeeper had been doing what they were supposed to do and had reported this 3 years ago, not only would the drug manufacturing have been shut down, but also those illegal immigrants wouldn't have been suffering for 3 years in this factory. So there are very, very serious consequences to all of this. So it's very important, and I think it's important that those stories do get out. So thanks very much.
You're very welcome.
Okay, do you any more? We've got one final poll question, but any more questions that have come through? We've got.
There's probably lots of questions we didn't get time to come round to, but yes, we do have one more poll. We haven't done any kind of any mention really of our software, and we do have a couple of software products that can assist you on the AML side of things. We have AML Centre for recording all your documented processes, and we also do have a AML electronic identification check service that's backed by Equifax. We use them as a supplier for that. If you do want a demonstration of that software at some point, then please do just answer yes to the poll, and then we'll come back to you and organise a demonstration for you.
While we're doing that, I've got Rachel's asked there's a couple of really good questions here. I'm particularly interested in this one. This is from Fiona. What about the preliminary meeting where you're trying to win a new client and they inevitably start asking you questions about their income, etc. You have not continued. We've gone down. They start discussing their earnings. Can you continue the meeting without ID if not billed?
No, it's not about whether you bill or not, because even if you are doing voluntary work for someone, but your line of business is bookkeeping and accountancy, and you are doing books for someone, then you need to ID and V that client. So it's not about whether you charge them or not. Now, in this case. No, you can. No, really, you should stop and say, actually, we can't talk about this until I've engaged you and we've gone through all the right checks.
Okay, so you have to stop. You can't
you
go
really
beyond
should,
that.
yeah.
Fine, okay. Right, okay, well, thank you very, very much for that, everybody. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you very much, Lucy, and thank you very much, Dean. We've got a few bits coming up. So we are going to be appearing at the Digital Accounting Show in next week. So that's in Battersea. I hope you can come along and visit us there. We'll be at Accountex in May, and we'll be joined, in fact, by Lucy, who is going to be on our stand answering your questions. If anyone does want to follow up with Lucy, how can people get in touch with you?
So best ways are either to connect with us on LinkedIn, Lucy Brown, or Calathea Solutions has a LinkedIn page, or email us at info@calatheasolutions.co.uk, and we will give us your details, your phone number, and we'll give you a call back.
Wonderful, thank you. And we will be back in a couple of weeks' time on the 1st of May, where we're going to be doing a power hour, which is all about our accounts production, in particular our new groups launch that we're putting out to allow for consolidated accounts. And beyond that, we have some big news that on the 12th of June, we're going to be making MTD fashionable again, because we're going to have HMRC and Rebecca Bennyworth in the studio, revisiting the whole where is MTD? What is it doing? Where are we going with it? It'll be an open forum discussion. It's going to be a big one, essential to watch. Please do come and join us for that. That's the 12th of June. Until then, take care.